Keanu Reeves was not born into a life of comfort and ease. From the very beginning, his life carried struggles that most children his age would never have to face. When he was still very young, his father left the family. His mother was strong and loving, but she had to work very hard to keep the household running. The family moved often, from one city to another, from one country to the next. This left Keanu feeling like a traveler without a permanent home. Each time he thought he was settling in, life would shift again, and he would be placed in a new environment. For a child, such constant change could be heavy, and for Keanu, it was especially so. At the age of 7, Keanu found himself spending time with his grandmother. She was a woman full of wisdom, patience, and kindness. She had lived through hard times herself, and she carried a sense of peace within her, a kind of calmness that made people feel safe when they were near her. Keanu loved being around her because she gave him something no one else seemed to give at the time: stability. When his world felt shaky and uncertain, his grandmother's presence was steady, like a strong tree in the middle of a storm. One evening, as the sun was setting and the house grew quiet, Keanu sat with his grandmother in the small living room. The room was dimly lit with soft candles, giving it a warm and gentle glow. He sat on the floor, playing quietly with a small toy, while his grandmother sat in her chair, knitting. She looked over at him and noticed the way he seemed deep in thought, his face too serious for a child. She put her knitting aside and called him to sit near her. He climbed into her lap, resting his small head against her shoulder. "My dear boy," she whispered softly, "you look so worried. What is troubling you?" Keanu didn't know how to explain it. He didn't have the right words for the emotions he carried at such a young age. All he knew was that sometimes he felt very alone, even when surrounded by people. He looked up at her with his big, questioning eyes. His grandmother could see that this was a child who carried more weight than most children his age should. She stroked his hair gently and decided to share something precious with him. "When I was your age," she began, "I also felt lost sometimes. Life was not easy for me either. But my grandmother gave me something that helped me every single day. It is a prayer. A very simple prayer. Do you want me to teach it to you?" Keanu nodded silently. He wasn't exactly sure what a prayer meant, but the way his grandmother spoke made him curious. She leaned closer, her voice quiet and calm, and whispered a few lines into his ear. The words were not long. They were not difficult. They were simple, yet filled with meaning. They spoke of peace, of strength, of love that could not be broken, and of the comfort that one was never truly alone. Keanu repeated the words after her, his small voice barely above a whisper. At first, he just copied the sounds, not fully understanding. But his grandmother smiled and told him, "Each time you feel afraid, or sad, or lonely, you can close your eyes and say these words. It will remind you that you are safe, that you are loved, and that there is always light, even in darkness." That night, as he lay in bed, Keanu whispered the prayer again. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, and for the first time in many nights, he felt calm as he drifted into sleep. The words became like a secret treasure, something only he and his grandmother shared. In the days that followed, Keanu began to notice something. Whenever he felt nervous, like when he had to meet new children in a new place, he would repeat the prayer quietly to himself. His heart would stop racing so fast. He would feel braver, as if an invisible hand was holding his. Even when he struggled to read or felt left behind in school because of his dyslexia, the prayer reminded him that he was not defined by his struggles. He carried it in his heart like a shield. His grandmother noticed the change in him. She would watch him play and smile when she saw him pause for a moment, close his eyes, and whisper the words. She knew the prayer was taking root in him, the way it had in her when she was his age. It gave her comfort to know that when she wasn't around, her grandson still had something to guide him, something to make him strong from the inside. Keanu didn't tell many people about the prayer. It was not something he wanted to explain or share widely. To him, it was like a secret code between him and his grandmother. Others might not understand, but he didn't mind. All he knew was that it worked. It gave him courage when he felt scared. It gave him hope when life felt unfair. One afternoon, after a difficult day, Keanu came home upset. He had been teased by some other children who laughed at the way he read slowly. He ran into his grandmother's arms, tears in his eyes. She held him and reminded him gently, "Remember the words I taught you, my boy. Say them now." Keanu wiped his tears and whispered the prayer. Slowly, his breathing calmed, and a small smile returned to his face. His grandmother kissed the top of his head and said, "You see? You are never truly alone." From that day on, Keanu began to trust the prayer even more. It was not magic, but it felt like a key that unlocked peace whenever he needed it. He was still a child, still learning, still stumbling through challenges. But now he had something special, a tool that would carry him through not just his childhood, but the rest of his life. Though he didn't know it then, that simple evening with his grandmother would stay with him forever. It would become a turning point in his young heart, planting seeds of kindness, patience, and quiet strength. For Keanu, the secret prayer was not just words, it was the beginning of a lifelong journey toward finding peace even in the hardest moments. And as he grew older, he would realize more and more how powerful that night had been. His grandmother hadn't just given him a prayer. She had given him a compass, a direction, a light that would guide him through the storms of life. At 7 years old, he didn't know what the future would hold, but he already carried within him a gift that no one could ever take away. As the years moved forward, Keanu's life did not become easier. In fact, the more he grew, the more challenges appeared in his path. He was a boy who seemed quiet on the outside, but inside he carried storms of emotions that few people could see. His family life was never stable. Moving from one city to another became a normal part of his childhood. Each new place meant starting over, new schools, new teachers, new classmates. For some children, change could be exciting, but for Keanu it often felt like a burden. Just when he started to feel comfortable somewhere, it was time to pack up and leave again. This constant movement made it hard for him to make lasting friends. While other children grew up with the same classmates year after year, Keanu was always the new kid. Sometimes he was welcomed, but other times he was treated as an outsider. The unfamiliar faces, the strange accents, the different ways of doing things, these made him feel like he never truly belonged. But whenever loneliness crept into his heart, he remembered the secret prayer his grandmother had whispered to him when he was 7. At first, he used the prayer in small moments. For example, when he had to walk into a classroom filled with children who already knew each other, he would close his eyes for a brief second, repeat the words quietly in his heart, and then take his seat. The prayer didn't erase the fear, but it gave him courage to face it. It was like a gentle hand on his shoulder, reminding him he was not alone, even if no one spoke to him right away. School was another battle for Keanu. He struggled with reading and writing because of dyslexia. Words on the page often looked jumbled to him. While other children seemed to glide through lessons, he would stumble and get frustrated. Teachers sometimes mistook his struggles for laziness, and classmates occasionally laughed when he read slowly or made mistakes. Those moments were painful. They cut deep into his young heart. But again, the prayer became his anchor. Each time he felt humiliated or discouraged, he would whisper it under his breath. The simple words reminded him that he was more than his difficulties, more than the laughter of others. The prayer told him that strength wasn't measured by how fast he could read, but by how he carried himself through hardship. Slowly, Keanu began to understand that his worth was not defined by school grades or the approval of others. Outside of school, life tested him in different ways. His family faced financial struggles, and he often watched his mother work tirelessly to provide for them. She tried her best to keep a smile, but Keanu could see the exhaustion in her eyes. There were times when money was short, and times when arguments filled the air. These moments made him long for the peaceful evenings with his grandmother. When things felt too heavy, he would sit alone, close his eyes, and repeat the prayer. It was like returning to her lap, to her soft voice, to the warmth of that candlelit room. One memory stayed with him deeply. He was about 9 years old, sitting on the steps outside his home after a particularly rough day. He had been scolded by a teacher for reading slowly, teased by classmates, and then came home to find his mother upset about unpaid bills. He felt crushed, as though the world had decided to place all its weight on his small shoulders. For a moment, he wanted to cry and run away. But instead, he closed his eyes and said the prayer. With each line, his breathing slowed, his heartbeat steadied, and a small spark of hope returned. He realized that even if everything around him was unstable, there was something steady inside him, the gift his grandmother had given him. As he grew older, he began to use the prayer not only in times of sadness, but also in moments when he needed focus. For example, when he wanted to learn something new, he would say the prayer first, as though asking for clarity. It helped him quiet the noise in his head, the doubts and fears that told him he couldn't do it. With the prayer, he found a way to center himself, to concentrate on what mattered instead of the distractions. By the time Keanu was a teenager, the prayer had become part of his daily rhythm. It was no longer something he thought about only in emergencies, it was woven into the fabric of his life. On his way to school, he would whisper it. Before going to bed, he would say it softly. When he felt joy, he repeated it as a way of giving thanks. It was not a routine forced upon him, it was something he wanted, something that felt natural, like breathing. But what made the prayer most powerful was not just the words, it was the memory of his grandmother's love. Whenever he said it, he felt her presence beside him. He remembered her hands holding him, her voice guiding him, her eyes filled with kindness. Even when she wasn't physically there, the prayer carried her spirit. This gave Keanu a sense of connection, a reminder that love could cross distance and time. Teenage years can be confusing for anyone, and Keanu was no exception. He faced questions about his future, about who he was, about what he wanted to become. Many times, he doubted himself. He wondered if he would ever find a place where he truly belonged. In those moments of uncertainty, he returned to the prayer. It did not give him direct answers, but it gave him patience. It taught him to wait, to trust that things would unfold as they should. One evening, while walking home after a long day, he stopped at a park and sat under a tree. The sky was turning dark, and the air carried the chill of night. He felt small and unsure about the future. But as he repeated the prayer, he realized something important: he didn't need to know all the answers right away. He only needed the strength to face each day as it came. That realization lifted a weight from his shoulders. People around Keanu noticed that he carried himself differently. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking like some of his peers. Instead, he had a quiet strength, a calmness that stood out. Friends would ask him how he stayed so composed in difficult situations, but he never explained the secret prayer. It was his private source of peace, something he wanted to keep between himself and his grandmother. To him, sharing it with others might make it lose its magic. The prayer was also shaping his character in ways even he didn't fully realize at the time. It was teaching him kindness, because the words spoke of love and compassion. It was teaching him resilience, because it reminded him to keep going even when life was hard. And it was teaching him humility, because it showed him that strength came not from pride or power, but from faith and patience. Looking back, Keanu would later understand that those early years, though full of struggles, were also full of lessons. The prayer had turned his difficulties into opportunities for growth. It had transformed moments of loneliness into moments of self-discovery. It had given him a foundation that fame, wealth, or success could never replace. At the time, he was just a boy trying to make it through each day. But with every whispered prayer, he was building the inner strength that would carry him through the challenges of adulthood. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet practice would one day help him face some of the deepest tragedies and biggest trials of his life. For now, all he knew was that when he closed his eyes and repeated those simple words, he felt at peace. And for a child who had seen more change and hardship than most, that peace was a priceless gift. When Keanu stepped into adulthood, the real world came at him fast. Like many young people, he dreamed of finding his path, but his journey was not smooth. He had a passion for acting and storytelling, but success was far away in the beginning. He faced rejection, doubt, and endless questions about whether he was good enough. The world of Hollywood could be bright on the outside, but behind the shining lights, there was pressure, competition, and disappointment. As a young actor, Keanu often walked into auditions with hope in his heart, only to walk out with silence or rejection. He wasn't always the first choice. Casting directors sometimes doubted his abilities or thought his quiet personality didn't fit their vision. Each rejection felt like a door slamming shut in his face. For some people, that would have been enough to quit. But Keanu remembered the prayer his grandmother had taught him when he was only 7. Before every audition, he would take a deep breath, close his eyes for a moment, and whisper the prayer. It gave him courage to step forward, no matter how nervous he was. Even if he didn't get the role, he didn't allow despair to swallow him whole. The prayer reminded him that he was more than one audition, more than one rejection. It gave him the strength to try again, to keep showing up even when the odds seemed small. Life, however, was not only about career struggles. Keanu soon faced personal tragedies that could break even the strongest heart. He lost close friends too early. The pain of those losses sat heavy on his shoulders. Grief is not something anyone can prepare for, and for Keanu, it came like a storm without warning. Nights felt longer, mornings felt heavier, and silence often seemed louder than any sound. Yet, in those dark hours, he went back to the prayer. He would sit alone, sometimes on the floor of his room, light a single candle, and whisper the words his grandmother gave him. Each word was like a thread stitching his broken heart together, slowly, gently. The pain did not vanish, but the prayer reminded him that he was not completely alone, even when loneliness tried to convince him otherwise. It gave him the courage to carry his grief with grace. There were days when he had to perform in front of cameras, even when his heart was still mourning. People around him saw his calmness, his gentleness, but few knew what he carried inside. What kept him steady was that same secret prayer. He repeated it quietly while standing backstage, while waiting in his car, or while sitting in a quiet corner of a set. It was like a bridge connecting his childhood to his adult life, guiding him in moments of doubt and sorrow. As his acting career began to rise, people admired his talent, but they also noticed something else: his humility. Unlike many who chased fame and fortune, Keanu never let success change who he was. He gave freely, lived simply, and treated others with kindness. Strangers who met him on the street were often surprised by how genuine he was. Some wondered how he could remain so grounded in a world that constantly lifted people high only to drop them down. The truth was that the prayer played a big role. The prayer wasn't just a set of words, it was a way of living. It reminded him to stay humble, to treat everyone equally, and to never let bitterness or pride take over. When others were greedy, the prayer taught him contentment. When others were unkind, it reminded him to respond with patience. And when life brought both joy and pain, it taught him balance. Even in moments of great success, Keanu never forgot where he came from. On film sets, while others celebrated big paychecks or fame, he would quietly thank life for the opportunity and whisper the prayer to himself. He knew that fame was temporary, but the values his grandmother gave him were eternal. The prayer became his anchor in both storms and sunshine. There was one moment in his life that showed how much the prayer had shaped him. A close friend once asked him how he managed to stay so calm after facing so many personal losses. Keanu smiled gently and didn't give a long explanation. Instead, he said softly, "When I was a child, my grandmother gave me something precious. I carry it with me always." He didn't go into detail, but those who knew him best understood that his strength came from something deeper than fame or money. At times, Keanu found himself walking through the city streets at night, blending into the crowd. He wore simple clothes, often unnoticed by people rushing past. As he walked, he would repeat the prayer under his breath. The busy streets did not disturb him, instead, he felt peace in the middle of chaos. The prayer made him see the world differently. It taught him to notice the small acts of kindness, the smile of a stranger, the laughter of children. These little things became reminders of the goodness that still existed around him. His grandmother's prayer had also shaped the way he responded to challenges on film sets. Acting could be stressful: long hours, difficult scenes, high expectations. Some actors let pressure make them angry or impatient, but Keanu remained calm. Before a tough scene, he would close his eyes, breathe deeply, and say the prayer silently. By the time the director called action, he was centered, steady, and ready. The older he became, the more he realized that the prayer was not just a childhood memory, it was a gift for his entire life. It was as if his grandmother had planted a seed inside him when he was 7, and now that seed had grown into a strong tree, providing shade and shelter through every season of life. Keanu also discovered that the prayer gave him compassion toward others. He noticed when people were struggling, even if they didn't speak about it. He had a way of sitting with people quietly, offering his presence without judgment. This, too, came from the prayer, which reminded him that love and kindness were the strongest forms of strength. Though the world admired him for his roles in movies, Keanu knew that his greatest role was not on the screen but in real life, being a human who lived with compassion, patience, and quiet strength. And that role, he believed, was made possible because of the prayer his grandmother whispered into his ear so many years ago. When people looked at him, they saw a man who carried himself with grace despite the heavy losses he had endured. They saw someone who didn't let fame change him, who gave freely to others, who respected everyone equally. What they didn't see was the silent prayer running through his heart like a river, guiding his every step. The prayer didn't take away his pain. It didn't remove the hardships of his life. But it gave him something more valuable, the ability to walk through life's darkest valleys without losing his light. And so, as Keanu moved deeper into adulthood, his grandmother's gift continued to guide him. It was the invisible strength behind his calm smile, the quiet voice in his heart when the world grew too loud, and the secret anchor that kept him steady when everything around him seemed to fall apart. As the years passed and Keanu's name became known all over the world, people often wondered what made him different from so many other actors in Hollywood. Fame has a way of changing people. For some, it brings pride, for others, it brings distance. But with Keanu, people noticed the opposite. Fame never seemed to climb into his head. He stayed grounded, gentle, and humble. He was the same man who would share a meal with a stranger, give up his seat on the subway, or quietly help someone in need without announcing it to the world. This behavior left people curious. They saw the bright movie star, but they also saw a man who seemed untouched by the noise around him. For Keanu, the answer was simple: it all went back to the secret prayer his grandmother taught him when he was 7. The prayer had not only carried him through childhood and the storms of his early adulthood, it had shaped the way he saw people and the way he chose to live. Whenever he whispered the words, he was reminded of what truly mattered. It wasn't fame. It wasn't money. It wasn't recognition. It was kindness, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from treating others with respect. On film sets, this became very clear. While others demanded special treatment, Keanu preferred to be part of the team. He often walked among the crew, greeting them warmly, asking how they were doing, and sometimes even sharing snacks with them. One story spread about how he treated the stunt team during The Matrix. Instead of seeing them as workers in the background, he saw them as brothers who risked their bodies to make the movie great. Out of his own pocket, he gifted them motorcycles as a token of appreciation. People were amazed by this, but to Keanu, it was simple. It was what the prayer had always reminded him to do: honor the people around you. Even in everyday life, the prayer guided him. When paparazzi followed him, instead of shouting or getting angry, he would smile politely or quietly walk away. When strangers approached him on the street, he listened, looked them in the eye, and gave them his full attention. This was rare in a world where many celebrities built walls around themselves. But Keanu's prayer had taught him that every person mattered, whether they were famous or not. The prayer also gave him a sense of balance. Hollywood could be a place of extremes: extreme wealth, extreme attention, extreme pressure. Many actors lost themselves in that world, forgetting who they were before the cameras turned on. But Keanu carried the prayer like a compass. It pointed him back to humility whenever success tried to pull him too high. It gave him peace whenever criticism tried to push him too low. There was another lesson the prayer taught him: gratitude. It reminded him to see blessings in small things. He didn't need a red carpet to feel joy. He found happiness in a cup of coffee, in a motorcycle ride on an open road, in laughter shared with a friend. While many chased bigger and bigger pleasures, Keanu found contentment in the simple gifts life offered. That's why people who met him often said he felt real and authentic. He wasn't acting when he was kind. It came from his heart, shaped by the quiet words his grandmother had given him. One afternoon, Keanu was spotted sitting on a park bench, eating a sandwich alone. To outsiders, it looked unusual. Why would one of the biggest stars in the world sit like an ordinary person in public? But to Keanu, it wasn't unusual at all. He enjoyed the simplicity. While he ate, he whispered the prayer, letting its words fill him with calm. He didn't need a spotlight. He needed peace, and he found it in small, ordinary moments like this. The prayer also shaped how Keanu responded to pain that never fully left him. Losing friends, facing heartbreak, and carrying memories of tragedies, those wounds could have made him bitter. But instead of letting bitterness grow, he chose compassion. The prayer reminded him that life's fragility should make us more gentle, not more hardened. This is why, even when hurting, Keanu extended kindness to others. His heart understood what it meant to suffer, so he did his best to lighten the suffering of those around him. Stories about Keanu's kindness spread across the world. A fan once shared how Keanu stopped to help push a car stuck on the side of the road. Another story told of him chatting with a homeless man for hours, sharing snacks and listening to his story. To many, these stories seemed unbelievable for a Hollywood star. But for Keanu, it wasn't about being noticed. It was about living the words of the prayer: treat each person as a soul worthy of dignity. There were also moments of deep reflection. Fame gave him access to many things, but it also left him with quiet nights of thinking. In those moments, he leaned on the prayer not just for comfort, but for direction. It reminded him to stay soft in a world that often hardened people. It told him to forgive instead of holding grudges, to love instead of turning cold, to keep walking with humility even when others placed him on a pedestal. Friends who knew Keanu often described him as a man of silence. He didn't always fill the air with words, but when he spoke, it was meaningful. This habit, too, came from the prayer. It taught him that silence could be powerful, that one didn't always need to shout to be heard. Instead, presence, patience, and gentle action spoke louder than noise. Sometimes, when he sat alone, he thought back to the night his grandmother first shared the prayer with him. He could still picture the candlelight, her soft voice, and her warm embrace. Decades had passed, but the memory was fresh. It was proof that love, once given, never dies. Her gift had become his guide, her voice had become part of his own, and her wisdom had become the center of his way of life. Even when people asked him about his philosophy, Keanu didn't talk about the prayer openly. He preferred to keep it private. But his actions revealed its presence more loudly than any explanation could. His generosity, his humility, his ability to stay calm in chaos, all were shaped by those whispered words from his grandmother. And so, while the world looked at him as a movie star, Keanu knew he was something simpler. He was a man carrying a secret prayer in his heart, letting it guide his every step. The prayer didn't make him perfect, he was human, with struggles and flaws, but it gave him a steady light. And that light shined in everything he did, from the way he treated strangers to the way he lived quietly in a noisy world. To Keanu, the prayer was not just about comfort in hard times. It was about choosing kindness in everyday life. It was about remembering that success is temporary, but character lasts forever. It was about being a human first and an actor second. The prayer had become more than words. It had become a way of life. As the years passed, Keanu Reeves became more than just a movie star. He became a symbol of humility, kindness, and quiet strength. People admired his films, of course, but what truly touched their hearts was the way he lived his life. Behind every smile, every act of generosity, and every calm response to life's storms, there was the hidden prayer his grandmother had whispered into his ear when he was just 7 years old. By now, the prayer had become such a natural part of him that he didn't even need to think about it. It was in the way he breathed, in the way he walked, in the way he interacted with others. It was like an invisible thread woven into his soul, guiding his choices without him even realizing it at times. He never stood on a stage to announce it, never tried to teach it to the world, but it lived in him. And because it lived in him, it was visible through his actions. When fans saw him pause to talk kindly with strangers, they saw the effect of the prayer. When colleagues noticed how he treated everyone equally, from directors to the newest crew members, they saw the effect of the prayer. When people read stories of him quietly helping those in need without seeking attention, they saw the effect of the prayer. It was never about words, it was always about living the values hidden inside those words. Keanu often reflected on how far he had come since that candlelit night with his grandmother. He thought of her often, remembering her gentle hands, her wise eyes, and her voice that carried both softness and strength. Though she had long passed, he felt her presence each time he whispered the prayer. It was as if she walked beside him still, smiling at the man he had become. He carried her legacy not through grand gestures but through simple, everyday kindness. For Keanu, the prayer was more than comfort during hard times, it was a reminder of how to live. It told him that strength was not about power or control but about compassion and patience. It told him that love was not something to be hidden but something to be shown in small, quiet ways. It told him that even when life felt unfair, peace could be found by staying true to what is good. This way of living made him a mystery in Hollywood. While others chased headlines and wealth, Keanu continued to walk his own quiet path. He gave away much of what he earned, supported those around him, and never made a show of it. The prayer reminded him that true wealth was not measured in money but in the lives one touched with kindness. There was a moment when an interviewer asked him about happiness. Keanu paused for a long time before answering. His reply was simple: happiness is in being here, in the small moments. Though he didn't mention the prayer, those words reflected what it had always taught him, that joy is found not in what the world gives, but in how you choose to see and live each day. The prayer also shaped his response to suffering. Life continued to bring challenges his way, as it does for everyone. Pain never disappeared completely. But instead of letting it harden him, Keanu chose to let it soften him. He allowed grief to teach him empathy. He allowed struggles to make him gentle with others. Each time the world tested him, he turned back to the prayer, and each time it gave him strength to keep moving forward with dignity. For those who looked up to him, Keanu became more than an actor. He became proof that a person could go through hardship, fame, and loss, yet remain kind, humble, and true to themselves. What many did not know was that this strength came from a seed planted in childhood, a prayer whispered by a grandmother who simply wanted her grandson to feel safe and loved. Now, when Keanu thinks about his journey, he sees a clear thread that connects it all. That night at 7 years old, when he sat in his grandmother's lap and listened to her soft voice, was more than just a childhood memory, it was the foundation of his life. The prayer she taught him became his compass through every season: childhood confusion, teenage struggles, adult grief, and the chaos of fame. He often walked through the streets, unnoticed in his simple clothes, whispering the prayer as the city rushed around him. It was a private practice, but one that gave him strength in public life. He didn't need people to know about it, because the results were already visible. His kindness, his humility, his ability to remain calm, these were all reflections of the quiet words he had carried since childhood. To him, the prayer was never about religion or ritual. It was about love, peace, and the reminder that no one is ever truly alone. It was about finding light in darkness and holding on to hope when the world felt heavy. It was about remembering that every person matters, no matter how small or overlooked they may seem. As time went on, the world continued to share stories about Keanu. Fans on the internet collected examples of his kindness, calling him one of the nicest men in Hollywood. They shared videos, photos, and experiences that proved he was different from the typical star. But what they didn't realize was that they were witnessing the quiet power of the prayer his grandmother had given him decades earlier. For Keanu, it was never about building a reputation. It was about living honestly. And living honestly, for him, meant living by the values whispered to him when he was 7: be kind, be patient, stay humble, love deeply, and never forget that peace can be found even in the hardest of times. Looking back, Keanu knew he had faced many storms in his life. But he also knew that each storm had been met with the same quiet strength, the same whispered prayer. It had carried him from a little boy sitting in his grandmother's lap to a man respected by millions. And though the world admired his movies, his true story was not about fame, it was about the quiet gift of a grandmother's love, carried through a lifetime. And so, Keanu continued to walk forward, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with quiet steps. Each day, he carried the prayer within him, letting it shape his heart and his actions. The world may never know the exact words his grandmother gave him, but they could see the results in the way he lived his life. To him, that was enough. The secret prayer was not meant to be shouted, it was meant to be lived. And Keanu Reeves lived it every single day, turning a grandmother's whisper into a lifelong light for himself and for everyone who crossed his path.